What's up, friends, and welcome back to Fantasy Pros, the football podcast. I'm Chris Welsh. That's Pat Fitzmaurice. We got Scott Pianowski, and we've got quarterback/tight end ranks for Week 7. Boys, let's not waste any time outside of telling everybody that you can go to fantasypros.com/rankings to check out not just the quarterback and tight end rankings, but any other position. They change throughout the week. Make sure you're locked into that. Maybe help you make some really tough decisions. You know, if you didn't go and get my playbook, that literally goes and tells you, and it says, hey, by the way, we've looked at your league. This player is on your bench. Make this change. If you don't need that type of hand holding, at least go to the rankings page and follow things up so you can know all the movement and what the expert consensus ranks of over 200 football rankers are doing. Quarterback ranks, let's kick it off here. Going to the big board, our number one quarterback for the week is Lamar Jackson versus Tampa Bay. Number 2, Jaden Daniels, rinse and repeat from last week. We got Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Jordan Love. That rounds out your top 5. Joe Burrow, Baker Mayfield, CJ Stroud, Sam Darnold, Brock Purdy, Kyler Murray, and Geno Smith. That is your top 12. Gentlemen, Sam Darnold coming in at 9, and you both have him as a top 12 starting quarterback. Scott, let's start with you. Sam Darnold inside the top 12 over Brock Purdy. I'm just such a homer. I see that, and I'm like, come on, why do you hate on Brock Purdy every week? But top 10 for Sam Darnold. Are you going to start Sam Darnold over Brock Purdy? That's my question, Scott.
That's a decision I'd probably make as late as possible, closest to the kickoff. But it's a trust in Kevin O'Connell. Obviously, Darnold won't have Aiden Hutchinson, unfortunately, breathing down his neck, one of my favorite players who got hurt last week. And I think last week, Detroit wins big, but they're still vulnerable in the back end. Their pass rush just took a hit. Darnold's going to have multiple touchdowns this week.
Pat, same thing. I mean, you don't have to really make it about Brock Purdy, but it's more about like your trust level with Sam Darnold for this week.
I would start Brock over Sam Darnold this week, but of all the interesting developments we've had in the NFL through the first 6 weeks, one of them is certainly that fantasy managers are feeling excited and relieved to have Sam Darnold back from his bye week. Who could have seen that coming? So, but like, hey, I get it. We love the weapons in Minnesota. We love the play calling of Kevin O'Connell. And yeah, as Scott said, the matchup against the Lions is not bad, especially without Aiden Hutchinson wreaking havoc on the pass rush.
Full disclosure, by the way, I have Purdy 2 slots higher. So it's still Purdy for me. He's got a little bit more to work with and probably a higher floor. We can't forget that Darnold at times has looked promising and then face planted. So we have that in the back of our minds. I also think Brock Purdy is good. I know he hasn't had the greatest red zone success. He had a little bit more of it last week when he got George Kittle going, but that's ultimately a lot of these quarterbacks, right? Geno Smith needs to move off this 1 touchdown a week thing that he keeps playing, but I do like Purdy. To me is like I think he's really a set and forget guy at this point.
An interesting one, maybe even would have been better outside of my little Niner homerism sometimes, is like Kyler Murray. Like Kyler Murray comes in at 11. Let me do the same thing, not to belabor it too much. These are also QB1s. The only difference, though, is when we do these rank shows, we're like, hey, these are the ones, you set these guys. You're not starting them. That's not the case with quarterbacks. It's like the top 8 is really chalky. And then outside of that, you've got this big collective of guys that you can start just kind of burning and churning, and you could stream different plays. And that's how that's how Baker Mayfield would have jumped in. You see Goff would jump in, that type of play. Kyler Murray comes in at 11. Sam Darnold's ranking higher. Fitz, are you Darnold over Kyler Murray this week?
So I'm reversed on that. I've got I have Brock Purdy QB9, Kyler Murray QB10, Sam Darnold QB11, but I know a majority of rankers do have Darnold ahead of Kyler Murray.
Is Kyler going to run? I mean, he 14 yards against the Packers, 83 against San Francisco, 3 against Washington, and we thought Washington was a good matchup. I'm never surprised when Kyler Murray is quarterback 2. I'm never surprised when he's quarterback 17. And what you're going to face if you're a Kyler Murray manager is you probably drafted him as your starter, but you may have drafted Mayfield as your backup. You may have drafted Darnold or picked him up off the waiver wire. You may have somebody that you're considering. I wish I wish Murray would just start producing so we can set and forget him. I don't think he deserves that tag.
And that's the crazy thing about like when you're looking at ones, but at both of these positions we're going to talk about, quarterback and tight end, they're not set and forgets after like the top 8. There are some decision making. Another one of these, I want to jump over this one, Fitz. I had mentioned his name, is Jared Goff. Jared Goff has like an ECR of 17 this week, really moved down. You've got him at 13 now. Scott's got him at 16. Like how viable, I mean, I guess you say 13, that kind of answers the question, but like you pushing him above ECR, how much does that make you want to push him into a starting lineup going up against Minnesota this week?
Yeah, so the matchup isn't great. Like, the Minnesota pass D has been really good, and Brian Flores has found all sorts of ways to dial up pressure in unexpected ways on quarterbacks. But the Lions are 4-1, and in their 4 wins, Jared Goff has averaged 23.5 pass attempts per game. So that's why he is not popping as a fantasy quarterback as of now. But he's averaging 8.9 yards per attempt and completing 71.1% of his passes. He's been really good. It's just that the volume hasn't been there. Well, now we have this Aiden Hutchinson injury that is going to drastically downgrade the Detroit defense. And I would say, like, I don't know, just off the top of my head, I would guess that Detroit has probably played with a lead in like 80% of their offensive snaps this season. I don't think that's going to carry on at the same sort of rate going forward. Goff is going to need to throw more, and he's going to start putting up better numbers. Like, so far, they have had the luxury, Ben Johnson, the Lions offensive coordinator, has, of just pounding the ball with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, David Montgomery would be a sell for me right now, because we've had the Monty friendliest game scripts imaginable for the Lions through the first 6 weeks of the season. He's still going to be really valuable going forward, but I just don't think he's going to be a top 10 running back. And so anyway, back to Goff, though. Yeah, I mean, I think the volume is going to start to tick up with him. And now that he's got Jameson Williams clicking on top of Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, he is laden with weapons. He's got a good offensive line. All he needs is that passing volume. I think he starts to get it maybe this week in a game with sneaky shootout potential.
The only thing I want to add, because I want to get your take on this, Scott, is just like, it is weird, a quarterback with that amount of weapons that gets ranked as low as he is. He's got 2 great wide receivers, one of the best tight ends. You've got a receiving back. You have 2 running backs, yet he's not really cracking the top 15 in a week in and week out basis. And he doesn't crack your top 15, Scott.
Yeah, I get it. By the way, I heard Pat talking about Montgomery. I guess going forward, Monty's going to get a raw deal with that schedule. But Goff never get a run and no goal line equity whatsoever. And when they get to the goal line, they're so good pounding it in with their 2 running backs. And Montgomery has that long touchdown streak, and Gibbs has been a decent touchdown scorer. That I feel like if you have Goff, you need those 2 touchdowns to survive. The hope here is that the defense will take a step back and the shootouts will fall. And because there's just been too many games where he doesn't get the 30 pass attempts. To play a quarterback proactively who doesn't run, who doesn't have 30 pass attempts in his back pocket, that's just a step I'm not willing to make, even though I love the Detroit offense. I live in the Detroit area. It's a really fun time to be a Detroit sports fan. 5 years ago, it was the exact opposite. Now, I don't know if they'll ever save the Pistons, but every other team has the arrow pointing forward. So a fun offense, unfortunately, a capped upside with as good as this running back room is.
Well, if you're locked into your QB1s and there's that big collective of guys, like I said, Goff would live in that world of those, the streamable quarterbacks, probably from like quarterback 9 to quarterback 15 or 16. If you're looking a little bit deeper, is Drake Maye really an option that you can look at? In Superflex, I think it's much more palatable, obviously, as your number 2. But if you're looking in the streaming market, and Scott, your ranks might indicate not quite QB1, but you've got him at QB 14. What say you about putting Drake Maye out there?
Yeah, they didn't hold his hand. I mean, they gave him 33 pass attempts. He ran aggressively and resourcefully, as often rookie quarterbacks do. The Jacksonville defense isn't something I'm concerned about. I feel confident Maye will have multiple touchdown passes this week. And I say that not liking the Patriots at all. I think they're one of the 5 worst teams in football. I think Jared Mayo was a mistake as the head coach hire, and we'll see how long that lasts. But I'm a believer in Drake Maye, and I think he'll have there'll be mistakes. The best way to learn, I think they did the right thing with Maye. Give him about a quarter of the season to observe, to learn a few things from the sidelines, but ultimately to develop, you need to play. I think they put him in around the right time, and I think he'll be passable in this game. I think he'll probably be quarterback 13 to 15 when the week is over.
Pat, if you have another quarterback outside of the big, like 12, 15 that you really like this week, you're welcome to throw that guy. Or if you want to speak on Drake Maye as being a potential viable streaming quarterback option.
Yeah, I'll talk about Maye because I do think he's a viable streamer, and I'll be starting him in a couple of 1 QB leagues this week. Actually, I do have him ranked a little lower than Scott, QB 17, but Maye had 21.5 fantasy points last week. That was good for QB 10 on the week. And the thing is, Maye ran for 38 yards, and I think like there's more rushing potential than that. He's an aggressive runner who averaged over 11 rushing attempts a game during his 2 seasons as a college starter. It's not always going to be pretty for Maye as a passer this year, especially with, not a great group of pass catchers and a pretty shaky offensive line. And we saw the first 4 or 5 series last week. Not pretty for Drake Maye, but we probably should be emboldened by this matchup against the Jaguars, who, oh, by the way, were just lit up by a rookie quarterback last week with Caleb Williams. I kind of want to tread lightly with Drake Maye, but I know some people might not have that option, including me in a couple of leagues this week.
The last 4 weeks, the Jaguars by far have allowed the most fantasy points to starting quarterbacks. We have to consider that.
Absolutely. Let's go over to the tight end ranks here. We're going to look at the big board for your top 12 tight ends to start this week. George Kittle comes in at number 1 against Kansas City. Travis Kelce, so that matchup, the Niners-Kansas City matchup's got the top 2 because he is number 2, Kelce. Number 3 is Brock Bowers, followed by Trey McBride, Evan Ingram, Sam Laporta at 6, Kyle Pitts at 7, Dalton Kincaid at 8. Things start to open up a little bit. Tucker Kraft at 9, Dalton Schultz, Zach Ertz, and Mark Andrews. So, like quarterback, top 8, 9, relatively chalk. You just said it, forget it. Then some question marks start to come up. Let's do the Mark Andrews thing like we do every single week. He's had 2 weeks. I'm still a big sell on it. He's still getting out snapped, but he did get the touchdown, and it's 2 viable weeks. He comes in as ECR 12. Scott, you have him at 10. Pat, you've got him at 15. So you are comfortable, whatever that means, Scott, with starting Mark Andrews this week.
Whatever that means. This is your opportunity to get out of the Mark Andrews business if you want to. It was volume prop 2 weeks ago. It was touchdown deodorant last week, although 4 for 66 is a good line. I'm sorry, 3 for 66, only 4 targets. I would love Fantasy Pros, by the way, to move targets to the left of receptions. That's my plea to you guys. I love your data is fantastic, but just move targets one more slot to the left. Sure, please do. Yeah, this is your opening to get out of the Mark Andrews business because he's behind too many people in this offense. They're always going to have a little bit of likely. Kolar will get on the field sometimes. A lot of the touchdowns are going to be gobbled up by their running back and their quarterback. Zay Flowers is just a slinky out there on the outside. What a fun. There's a guy I'd go and trade for, by the way, is Zay Flowers. But even in a stark tight end year, I don't trust Andrews going forward. I think this is your moment to get out.
There's a lot of streamers, and you can make an argument, hey, listen, if I don't have any other great options, blah, 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 blah. But, like Cole Kmet has been a no-brain starter over that. Pat Freiermuth is interesting with Russ Wilson now. Fitz, talk to us about Andrews. I'm out on the Andrews business, and if I have any inkling of any other type of tight end, I want to start them. But rankers are pushing him back up. How much of a mistake is this?
Congrats on anyone who benefited from the touchdown last week, but I do not have him ranked in tight end 1 range. Tight end 15 still hasn't had more than 5 targets in a game all season and played just 50% of the snaps last week. If Taysom Hill is back this week, I'd rather play Taysom Hill over Mark Andrews. Like I can imagine with Spencer Rattler quarterback, I could see the Saints playing a lot of Wildcat this week. So like if Taysom Hill plays, I will have him ranked well ahead of Mark Andrews.
So look out for Taysom Hill. That would be a guy that would move up the ranks. Only other one I want to hit on is Dalton Schultz, who ends up moving. Andrews and him actually flipped over the last 24 hours. Schultz moved up to 10. Scott, you've got him at 14. Pat, you've got him at 11. So anything on Dalton Schultz for you, Scott?
Just all the data's in bad area. He doesn't get a lot of routes. He doesn't get a lot of targets. He's got better even with Nico Collins hurt. Part of that is mitigated by Joe Mixon coming back and being another mouth to feed. I would play Hunter Henry over him. I would play Kobe Parkinson over him. Even Noah Fant, who's caught all of his targets the last 4 weeks. I think there's a little bit more meat on the bone that they haven't scraped off. I think Noah Fant could be interesting. I just don't like the role for Schultz in this Houston offense right now.
I'll throw one at you as well, and Fitz will ask you on this one. If you have, and this is a little tough because it's a Thursday thing, but it's like if Taysom wasn't there and you have none of the wide receivers, Juwan Johnson might be a guy that you could potentially start. I might be comfortable starting him over Schultz. I'm not sure what you think about that, Pat.
I don't want anyone tied to Spencer Rattler this week.
Okay.
How dare you smear Bub Means like that?
Plus, I mean, there have been weeks where Foster Moreau had more snaps and routes run than Juwan Johnson. Like, his role is always so hard to get a handle on. As for Schultz, yes, only 4 catches for 27 yards last week, but he did have a season high 8 targets. And I think the target outlook is enhanced with Nico Collins out. So I feel comfortable with him as like a back end tight end one. If you're in the tight end desperation zone, I think he's an okay play.
And hopefully did I say Juwan Johnson? Because in my head, I heard Juwan Jennings. So hopefully I said it correctly.
I think you said Juwan Johnson.
Okay.
Juwan will do.
Score. Could have just let it go and been right, and no one would have thought anything of it, but I didn't. Tight ends, messy as always. Make sure fantasypros.com/rankings. You can check out the latest rankings and the My Playbook app. Download the My Playbook app today. Sync your league. You can do some of these things for free, and you can get personalized advice to your league. It will literally tell you, hey, this tight end is on the waiver wire. Get Mark Andrews out of your lineup and go to this range. Use it today. My Playbook is your friend. It's going to make your fantasy life a lot easier, and there are so many more tools that you probably haven't even uncovered. But if it's just helping making a few better decisions in your tight ends, then we are doing a great service for you. For Pat Fitzmaurice and Scott Pianowski, I'm Chris Welsh. Good luck in your Week 7. That is Week 7 ranks in the book. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast.